So you did a nice job for your photo, and as you learned, it's difficult to replicate something exactly, and there's just a whole slew of factors that go into that. I think your thought process about how you could have changed it going forward was along the right path, and as we look at your images compared to Weston's, I'll give a few additional suggestions. So, as we've discussed several times through this project and through the course of the semester, Weston had a series of vegetable photographs that he made, and where the peppers have kind of been the most commonly known ones. Cabbage, I think, is actually quite lovely in the lines that we get. When Weston was photographing, he really appreciated detail. He liked smooth lines. He liked the play of light and shadow. And that came through in his work, regardless of whether he was doing nudes, whether he was doing vegetables, or as we saw with another project, even when he was photographing toilet. So he always took the same approach to his subject matter. Now, with the peppers, what he used was a tin funnel, and it gave a very interesting look. But because he had a cabbage here, which was presumably quite large, that didn't work, and so he just has a regular dark background. What's interesting to me about his background is that usually he would have done some dodging and burning in the image, and specifically you would think that he would darken this area up a little bit, and I'm actually a little surprised that he hadn't cleaned his background prior to the image. Now, you said one of the difficulties that you had with your photograph, if I can get my mouse to go over that way, is that you thought your focal length was off. A couple of reasons here. First of all, you thought that your cabbage was smaller, and so you had to be closer in order to compensate that for that. But the other thing that's actually really kind of more to the point is he used a big 8x10 view camera, and so he was recording his image on a huge 8x10 sheet of film, and that means that the lenses behave differently on that big view camera compared to what they do on your full frame DSLR. So while this looks like it's relatively wide, it could have been, easily could have been, 50 or 85 millimeter camera, a lens on that camera to get that more wide angle look. He's definitely a little further back than you were. The other thing that you said you had difficulty was lighting, and you were using the flashlight app on your phone in order to light it while you were holding your camera, and I think that all of those things were making it more cumbersome than it needed to have been. Certainly using a tripod and using a cable release so that you can hold your light and be closer to your subject would have helped. You could have locked down your composition with the room lights on and then lit your subject as you intended. The other thing really is to use some sort of lighting gear. I think stylistically the biggest difference that we see here is that he used a fairly soft-ish light that covered the entire cabbage pretty well. My guess from this from this image is that he probably used a softbox, so it's a little bit directional. He wouldn't have used just a naked bulb, because then we'd see really hard lines, but we see kind of a smooth transition here. It'd also be a little bit behind the cabbage, because obviously the brightest part is going to be the top part, and the light falls off a little bit, and we see that the shadows kind of fall forward from where the little ridges are. So you have your light in, I think, kind of straight above your cabbage, and because you're using a relatively small light source, it pretty much mandated that it was right above it. Had you been a little behind like Weston did, and you were a little bit behind, but I think his was a little bit more, then you would have had way too much fall off. and as it is, we had some fall off here, so we lose some of the detail down here in these shadows. And if we look at the info, you see that we're right down there in the single digits. It's not pure black, but it's pretty darn close, and I guess in some places it actually is. So that, I think, the biggest difference is that your light should have been a little bit bigger for what you were photographing. Your background, you said that you'd use just a black t-shirt dress. That's perfect. And if you look at what he used, my guess is it was probably a felt background. But either way, that little bit of texture kind of comes through, and your choice of material would have been ideal. Biggest thing, I think, is just a little bit of additional light. Now, I am guessing, because you are a professional photographer, and you used a professional camera, you probably have a raw image. You could bring back some of that detail. It's probably not going to work too well because this is the JPEG version. One of the tricks that works very simply and easily, is to make sure that your background is a smart object. And the reason I do that is, with all of my edits, I like them to be non-destructive, and you can see things like the curves and exposure and levels, brightness, contrast. All of those things are options that you can go back to edit. You can't do that in the tool I'm going to show you, and so converting to a smart filter or smart object so you can use a smart filter will allow you to make adjustments after the fact. So this is actually not a filter, it's an adjustment, and the shadow highlights, it works really well. And you can see even here with this JPEG version, we get some of that shadow detail back pretty well. This is the default setting that I use for this particular tool. It comes straight out of the box a little bit different, but you can see what a huge difference that is in bringing detail down here, and that's with the JPEG. So I mean, really, all of this area would expect to be lit pretty well. And I think that bringing these values up a little bit even more, you can get it even closer to the original Weston view. I guess we can't look back and forth when that's open. But you can see much brighter. We can probably even go a little further. Or perhaps on top of this we could do a levels and maybe bring things up just a touch more. You can kind of see how that goes. So kind of compare that overall brightness to that overall brightness. I think we're a little bit closer. Whenever you're making these kind of adjustments, you want to make sure that you didn't add any hot spots that are overexposed, and within the curves palette you can do that. You can also do it within the levels. And if you hold on the Alt or Option key, depending on if you're PC or Mac, click on this little slider here, and you can see wherever there's a little bit of color, we're losing a little bit of detail, but because it's basically just a few pixels here and there, that's fine. If it was anything more than that, then I would go back and I would take the brush tool and paint with black. I'd want a relatively low opacity and flow, and then kind of go over those areas that are just a bit hot, so that you can kind of get the best of both worlds. By brightening this up, I introduced a little hot spot here and here that I think becomes a little bit of a visual distraction. And so for this, I would just use a spot hailing brush, and I would just give it a click and take care of those quick little things so that it doesn't pull the viewer's eye into an area that you don't want it. Overall, nice job with your project. Let me know if you have any questions.